Well, hello and welcome. I am Matt Reed. I am the CEO of the Aga Khan Foundation in the UK and our global director of institutional partnerships. It is my great pleasure to welcome you here to this video forum today for a presentation on the Silk Road's A Living History by my colleague Christopher Wilton-Steer, head of communications here at the foundation in the UK. I wish that I were welcoming you to the Aga Khan Center at King's Cross, which is just up the street from where this outdoor exhibition lays. But of course, we're not able to do that. So instead, you're with me in my living room, dining room, office, where I've been spending most of lockdown. But I hope that we can see you in person sometime soon, perhaps on Granary Square. I wanted to start by saying a couple of words about the Aga Khan Foundation and the Aga Khan Development Network and our wider work in and along the Silk Road, and why we were motivated to help sponsor Christopher's work and exhibition. So as I said, I work for the Aga Khan Foundation, a part of 10 development agencies of something called the Aga Khan Development Network. We are promoting economic, social, and cultural development in a variety of fields. And in each of them, what we try to do is to improve the quality of life, promote pluralism, and enhance the quality of civil society in all of the countries that we serve. The places where we are located are in Central and South Asia, Eastern Africa, and a little bit in the Middle East, all places, as it happens, where the Silk Road and the spice routes passed a millennia ago. Our institutions, however, have been deeply engaged in those regions for going back at least a century, working in everything from education to healthcare, to energy and infrastructure, to rural development, and these days, especially climate change, adaptation, and mitigation, amongst many others. As we work in those regions and are engaged with them, of course, we realize that that many of you here in London or wherever you're tuning in from may not actually be familiar with the cultures or the landscapes or really the features of these countries. One area in particular is Central Asia. I think for a long time, since Central Asia was sort of behind the Iron Curtain, it was a place that wasn't quite as well known, but it's a place where the Aga Khan Development Network has been engaged, as I said, for institutions going back a century, but more particularly over the last 25 years. We've been working in particular in places like Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and of course, places where we had a traditional presence in Pakistan and India. And so one of our goals here in the UK is to actually bring some of the information, some of those cultures to light here to a UK audience and to audiences around the world, and to promote, as I said, pluralism and understanding about the different cultures and development issues present there. A few years ago, Christopher Wilton-Steer, who is our head of communications, but also happens to be a talented photographer, had a very successful show on work that we do in Cairo, in Egypt, in the Dubrovnik region. It featured artisans working in an area of Cairo where the Aga Khan Trust for Culture has restored a number of heritage sites, and where other agencies of the Aga Khan Foundation have been working. And so Christopher approached me about an idea to do something similar for a much wider expanse, looking at not only our work along the Silk Road, but looking at the people and cultures along the Silk Road. And so as Christopher came to me with the idea, I thought it would be an extraordinary opportunity to help bring it alive, I think, for people in London and perhaps elsewhere. And so that's what we're here to learn a bit about today, both the project itself and the journey that Christopher has taken. And so please let me introduce Christopher Wilton-Steer to you. And Christopher, take us on your route and on your journey. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Matt, for the introduction, and thank you all for tuning in today. I think we have nearly 200 people, which is amazing, and I think this is a topic a lot of people are very interested in, or know a little bit about, a lot about, but want to certainly learn more about. So it's a real privilege for me to be able to talk to you today. So I thought I'd start, before I started showing you some photographs from this journey, a little bit about the history of the Silk Road and my kind of personal interest in it. As some of you will know, this was a trade route that was established over 2,000 years ago. And it really, the genesis of it started with the Han Dynasty in about 138 BC. And they sent one of their generals to go and establish cultural and trade links with the peoples of Central Asia. And in doing so, they really set in motion this creation of a transcontinental trade route that would travel thousands of miles, along which people, goods, and ideas would flow. So that 2,000 years ago, Roman citizens would be garbed in silk, and coins with minted in Rome with Caesar's face were used for trade in spice markets in southern India, for example. And really, this trade route, gave birth to great nations, civilizations, the start of golden ages, and really connected the Eurasian peoples. But around about the 16th century or thereabouts, these maritime trade routes were sort of becoming more and more dominant, and so the overland trade routes lost some of their luster. But that legacy of interconnectivity never really ended. And today, the Silk Road is kind of being reimagined on this massive new scale through China's Belt and Road Initiative, which aims to connect about 65% of the world's population, in which billions of dollars are being invested every year, and many countries are part of it. And this will include trade links, roads, bridges, railway lines, you name it, connecting Europe and Asia again, and really regenerating those old trade links. And so, the idea of the Silk Road and the travel along it, obviously I'd heard about as a sort of a young student, and was fascinated by these parts of the world. And, when I was about 24, my first job was in Beijing, and I used to fly back and forth once or twice during that time. And I remember looking out of the window and thinking, what's down there? I know nothing about, I've heard about a few of these countries, but I really know very little about it. And I kind of became fascinated with the idea of taking an overland journey from Beijing to London, but I never did it back then. But then years later, I found myself working for the Aga Khan Foundation and traveling to some of these countries in Central Asia, photographing some of our projects there, and starting to think, okay, this is how these puzzles could fit together, and this is how a journey could happen. And so, had spoken to Matt about it, and I thought there's a really powerful story here about not only the kind of cultural diversity found along the route, which is of course important message for the foundation, but also about our work that we do there. And so in 2019, I set off, and after much planning, which I won't go too much into now, we can maybe, if there's a few questions in the Q&A, we can look into it. But I set off from King's Cross, St Pancras, and took the Eurostar, and I'm going to just put some of that imagery up now. Let me just get to the right slide. Here we go. And I hope you can all see that. Sanan, come in if you can't see it. But this shows the route that I took from London to Beijing, crossing 16 countries, which I traveled overland. And really overland, I was interested in those kind of feeling those transitions between different cultures. When we fly somewhere, we land, it's so foreign, it's so different. I hope that by traveling overland, I wouldn't have that feeling. I'd feel that feeling of connectedness to wherever I was. And I really did have that experience as I took it overland. And I did this over 4 months. And now I'm going to take you on some of that journey, or all of it. I took about 50,000 photographs. I'm not going to show you all of those, but for the exhibition itself, I had to whittle that down to 160. So the beauty of giving a presentation like this is I can show a little bit more and take you a little bit deeper into this journey, which I'm really excited to show you now. So I'm just going to set off straight to Venice, and this was kind of one of the key Western markets of the Silk Road. It had been established in the 7th century, as this lagoon city. But by the 15th century, it had established these kind of trade links with the Safavids in Iran or Persia, and the Mamluks in Cairo and the Ottomans of Turkey. And so all of these different influences started to come to Venice, especially those from the East. And so while I was there, one of the things I was looking at was this kind of, these influences and how Venice has been affected by them. And here you can see the Doge's Palace on the right and St. Mark's Cathedral on the left. And these are two buildings that, some art historians have sort of shown to perhaps they took various elements from the East. You can see here a closer up of that. And on the left, you can see there's lanterns above St. Mark's Cathedral. And a lot of people think they kind of echo the minarets that you would find in Cairo. Here's a picture on the right. And again, those lozenges on the left, those orange pieces on the Doge's Palace were seen as sort of, pastiche or references to kind of Ilkhanid, Central Asian design that was happening, thousands of kilometers away, but an idea of it had been brought around along the Silk Road. Here's a photograph of Giovanni Bellini's kind of Renaissance masterpiece called the San Giovi Altarpiece. But like many Renaissance pictures, you'll see the Madonna in the center, and she's wearing a blue robe. And all of that pigment was really made from lapis lazuli, which is a rock or a stone that was the only place in the world that could ever come from at that time was in northern Afghanistan and eastern Tajikistan. So that rock had been mined, had been taken, traveled 6,500 kilometers to Venice, ground up and turned into these Renaissance masterpieces. Wherever I go, I'm always fascinated by the role, artisan culture, because I feel they kind of tell you a story about a city or a place's past. And here I am in Luigi Bellevacqua's textile workshop, and this dates back 500 years. They still use wooden looms from the 18th century. They produce gorgeous fabrics for all the Italian fashion houses, for the Kremlin, the White House, but they still use these old techniques, and they still use silk imported from China, which you can see in the bottom left there, to produce these kind of beautiful masterpieces. Traveled across the Adriatic, that bit of water between Italy and Croatia, down the Dalmatian coast. This is now into Dubrovnik, also established in the 7th century by Greek sailors. And because of its strategic importance, it has been invaded by all of its neighbors over 1,000 years or more, including the Ottomans, Serbians, Hungarians. So it's a real mixture of all these different influences. But it was an interesting city, especially in today's context, with regards to trade, because of course it wasn't only goods and people that moved in and out of these cities, but also illnesses too, diseases, the plague. And this was a very badly affected city. And so they were the first city in the world to enact legislation that meant people had to quarantine before they came into it. I think that happened in about 1312 or 1377 or something like that. And so people traders who come in would have to quarantine on one of these islands behind before they came into the city. And actually quarantine, I think, comes from the Italian, or which they spoke, I think, in Dubrovnik at the time, meaning 40 days quarantino. Then moved in further south into Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is the starry mossed bridge that covers the Nevreta River. And this was built by the Ottomans in about 400, 500 years ago. And the great traveler Evliya Çelebi, who was an Ottoman traveler, he came here about 400 years ago. And he wrote in his travel book about how young men would come up to visitors and they would take their money on the bridge in exchange for jumping off it. And I can report happily that people are still doing that today, jumping off this bridge for money from tourists in this case. And this was a bridge that was destroyed in 1993 during the Bosnian War, and then was restored in about 2004 by numerous organizations, including the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, that had restored parts of the old town that you see around it here. This was the city as I moved east. This is the first place I heard the azan, the call to prayer, which was kind of poignant moment, a transition between cultures. And this is a lovely mosque that I think that azan had come from. It's called the Hadzi Kurt Mosque. It was built originally for leather tanners who were working in the nearby area. This is a young lady called Ilma I met there, who's holding up a Quran that is in both Arabic and Bosnian language. then moving through the Balkans, a zigzag through on this amazing train journey that was built during the Soviet times. It takes about 10 hours from Montenegro to Belgrade, and you go through about 400 tunnels and about 200 bridges. It's really this marvel of Soviet engineering, and eventually reach Belgrade. And in this area of the Balkans, and you'll see in a minute in Sofia in Bulgaria as well, is really where this confluence of religious traditions and orders comes together. Here we're in a Serbian Orthodox church. It's one of the most important ones in Belgrade. And then when we moved into Sofia, there's this amazing square called the Square of Religious Tolerance. And on each corner is a different mosque or synagogue here, or two churches from different Christian religious orders, bringing together these orders in one place, which I found a pretty remarkable and poignant place to be. Then just to give you a sense of where we are on the map, we're going to now move into Turkey, crossing that Bulgarian border. Of course, you'll recognize this is the Blue Mosque, was built in, I think, the 17th century roughly by the Ottomans, late 17th century. And it took some of its cues, architecturally at least, from the Hagia Sophia, which you'll see here, which was built about 1,000 years earlier or more by the Roman emperor, Roman Christian emperor, Justinian I. So this building in the foreground, you see the Blue Mosque in the background. This was originally a church. Then in 1453 or 1558, when the Ottomans took Constantinople and turned it into Istanbul, it became a mosque. And then during the reforms of the 20th century under Ataturk, it became a museum. And some of you would have noticed in the press about 9 months ago or a year ago, it became a mosque again, and interesting part of all these transitions. But you'll see that shallow dome there, which you see in so many Ottoman mosques. It's particularly kind of iconic of Ottoman Turkey. Now we're into the Grand Bazaar of Istanbul, which was built to kind of stimulate the Ottoman economy in around the 15th century. And this is really, this hub of Silk Road trade. It's got about 4,000 shops in it, about 61 covered streets. It's enormous. You can get lost in it. Amazing place to visit. And a staggering 90 million people pass through this every single year. It's not just tourists. It's, people come here to shop. It's like a, huge department store. And some of the scenes you can see there from around it. Now we're crossing the Bosphorus, which is the body of water that separates the two sides of Istanbul. So you can see it on the other side, and it also separates Europe from Asia. So we've moved into Asia, left Europe behind, heading eastward. And there I met this fantastic lady. She's called Aytun Tiryaki. She's a unique person in that she's a master calligrapher and an illuminator. These illumination is that gold bit around there, calligraphy, you know what that is. And so she's the first lady since Ottoman times to hold an ijaza in both of those disciplines. And ijaza means that she has the license to transmit knowledge to the next generation. So it's a very prestigious, important responsibility. And she has about 80 students that she's passing this on to. And of course, they want their ijaza also, but she can't give it to them unless they reach a very, very high level. Sometimes they'll spend 2 years on just one sentence getting that right. That's the ijaza from her master, because she said, this is a responsibility. Like if I give you an ijaza, that means that it connects to me and it connects to my master and to his master and their master all the way back to Ottoman times. So it's a huge responsibility. Here she is. She keeps her ink and paint in Chinese silk that you'll see here, which preserves it for a longer period of time with some of her students here. A real master. And she's actually come to London on a few occasions, I think, with the Prince's School of Traditional Arts to teach. Now, I took in a performance of these whirling dervishes, which is really quite an experience. These men, almost all dervish lodges are men, but I'll show you a different one in a minute with women. These men are they're whirling to create an ecstatic state in their mind, to make them feel closer to God, to make them feel fuller of love, and to be of greater service to everybody in creation. The practice of whirling originates from the 13th century Sufi mystic, which Sufism is the sort of inward dimension of Islam, or known as Islamic mysticism. The Sufi mystic was and poet was Rumi, who some of you all heard about, read his poetry. It's still, you see it everywhere still today. And he sort of inculcated or propagated this whirling as a way of feeling closer to God. This is a dervish house I went to just on the outskirts of Istanbul. This wasn't on the trip, a few years ago, and it is one of the only dervish houses in the world, if not the only one, that permits women to become dervishes. This is now into Konya, which is moving further east. This is the final resting place of Rumi. You can see his tomb on the right there, and some of the scenes from inside that tomb and outside of it, some of these tombstones. And then moving further east, I passed many of these caravanserai. This one goes back to the 13th century. It's a Seljuk era one. And these were the original kind of backbone of Silk Road trade. So if you were with your camels, your donkeys, and the merchants, these were built 30 kilometers apart. So that's roughly a day's journey. And they would come here and they would rest, wash, pray, share news. And interestingly, they would quarantine here for a period of time before going into cities in case they carried the plague. Then moving further east, you see here Mount Ararat in the distance. And getting a bit closer here, this is where Noah's Ark was reputedly hit ground. And then you have this very interesting part of Eastern Anatolia, Eastern Turkey, where you'll have these a lot of churches. And these date back to the 10th century or 11th century, during when the kingdoms of Armenia, various kingdoms of Armenia, stretched into Eastern Anatolia. And you'll see these churches around. You can see these runes almost on the right hand side etched into these rocks. This is the city of Ani, which was just to the north of there. We sat at a confluence of the Silk Road. It was a very rich city, one of the biggest in the world in the 10th century. It was called the city of 1,001 spires, but as you can see, very little remains today, but still an amazing place to go and visit. Now we're going to cross the border into Iran here. You can see where I put that marker. And we're going to the city of Tabriz. And this is home to the largest covered marketplace in the world. This wonderful bazaar. We're in the carpet selling area here. And you can see this man in the process here. It's, there's not many tourists there. This is all locals buying lots of carpets. These are silk carpets here. Some of them, I haven't got a picture here, but you'll see they're kind of rougher, made of wool. They tend to come from the countryside, and they tell all sorts of interesting stories about the kind of heritage of the countryside. But these ones are the silk ones, the kind of more royal, regal patterns that you see here. And it's really, you get lost here. Marco Polo was supposed to have come here in the 13th century. There are 22 caravanserais here, so he may have stayed at one of those. Easy to get lost. This man, I mean, there's no computers or phones really. It's like, pen and paper. This guy's even got an abacus here. It's really kind of wonderfully old-fashioned place and well worth a visit. This is the kind of food court, you'd call it. The gold area, I mean, it's a department store. I think there are 8,000 shops here, so it's twice the size of the one in Istanbul. Enormous place. And then this is Sultaniye. This is a mausoleum built by the Mongol general Oljaitu in 1312. His armies, these Ilkhanids from Central Asia, part of the Mongol dynasty, they swept across, conquered these lands, and he built this mausoleum for himself, which was going to be the biggest in the world. And with it, he brought this kind of Central Asian aesthetic, these kind of turquoise tiles, and you can see some of that stylized Kufic calligraphy around the drum of it. But it's interesting because, I mean, he took on the religion of those that he conquered, which was Shia Islam. So whilst he conquered the land, he also was transformed by it himself. Here are some of those pictures I found, photographs of it from, I think, the late 19th, early 20th century. So you can see what terrible disrepair it was in. This building's being repaired. It's been under restoration for over 50 years. So you can see how much work's going into it. Now we moved to Isfahan. This was in 1598, I think, was established as the capital of the Safavid Empire by Shah Abbas I. He was going to make it the most beautiful, wonderful city in the world, which he did. And you can see a lot of it was based around this square, which is in the middle of it. And in Isfahan, he brought together religion through the mosques. He brought the economy together, the bazaar, and he brought the palace together, here, which you can see, which were the 3 pillars of power in 16th century Persia. And this became his capital. And in order to beautify it, this is one of the Shah mosques, he brought hundreds of Chinese artisans who had incredible, tile work or frescoes or whatever it might be. And so he brought them here to Isfahan to help decorate it and train local artisans. You can see some of that here. This is the ceiling of the Sheikh Lotfolla Mosque, a private royal mosque. And in the bazaar today, there are hundreds of artisans still working away. And really that legacy of artisanal craft is still very much alive today. This is an amazing thing. I don't know, some of you may have seen this, others not. It's called Zorkana, which means house of strength. And here men come to perform a kind of spiritual form of exercise, whereby they'll either be in harmony or in groups or individually practicing this spiritual exercise. And you can see that in the top there's a man with a drum and he has a microphone and there's a bell, so there's music going along. And I'm going to show you some of this. And really what they're doing is they're praising Ali, who was the son-in-law of the Prophet, who was known for his great strength but also his humility. So those displays, those characteristics very much form the way that people do their exercise here. And I'll show you a very short video just to give you a sense of it. So you'll see they're almost spinning like dervishes. It's kind of an amazing thing to witness. Anyway, moving on, we're going south to the city of Yazd. You can see the Jami Mosque here, this beautiful Kufic calligraphy that you see also on the outside of a lot of the Uzbekistan mosques and madrasas, which I'll show you in a little bit. And Yazd is also really the kind of unofficial capital of Zoroastrianism. And that is there was the dominant religion of Persia before the arrival of Islam in the 7th century, and it is one of the oldest religions in the world. And people come to worship at fire temples. You can see the one here where the flames are kept burning for millennia. Some of them, centuries or millennia. This one's here in Yazd. And when a Zoroastrian dies, their body was taken to the top of a tower of silence, which you can see here. And I'll take you to the top right here. And this is where the body would be prepared, and then it would be left here for vultures and other carrion to pick the flesh off the bones. Because for a Zoroastrian, the skin, the flesh was seen as a pollutant and it couldn't be touch earth. So it had to be taken away, and then those bones could be buried afterwards. Now that practice is forbidden today, so Zoroastrians bury their dead in a coffin of lime plaster so that the skin doesn't touch the earth, or the flesh doesn't touch the earth. And because Zoroastrians, proselytism is not encouraged, so not that many live on today, but the rituals that they have live on in other religions. For example, Zoroastrians pray 5 times a day, and in their case, they pray in a specific direction, which is in the direction of the sun. Oops. Now, further south, getting really hot here. We're into the Lut Desert. This is the hottest place on Earth, in fact. And it was 55 degrees where I took this photograph. I almost felt nauseous most of the time. I was told that 200 kilometers down the road, it gets to 70 degrees centigrade, that is. So it's unbelievably hot. And there are people who live here, and amazingly, and they are sustained by these underwater channels called qanuts. And they come from the mountains, and someone dug them hundreds or thousands of years ago, and they bring water to the desert so that people can irrigate some areas of it, and of course have water to drink and all the rest of it. And I met this is my guide while I was there, this incredible sort of Martian landscape. And I said to him, "Why do you live here? Why would anyone live here?" And he said, "Everyone asks me that question, and the reason is because of the qanuts. I'm part of a lineage of people that has looked after them. I can't let them go. I have to maintain them. And anyway, that was his choice in life. Moving across the border to Turkmenistan, this is the capital city of Ashgabat, which is this extraordinary place, the city of white marble. It's full of these incredible buildings that kind of fuse a type of kind of Soviet architecture with Islamic geometry. This is the Arlem Center, the largest indoor Ferris wheel in the world. Very few people around. It's kind of a bit of an empty city, but I guess the hope is one day people will be there. These are some of the monuments that you can find there. Yes, surreal in a word. Moving across the border to Kiva in Uzbekistan. This is really that Silk Road city of the imagination. This was a city that sat on those crossroads of the Silk Road, and it made a fortune. But through fairly nefarious means, it was it was the largest slave market in the world, or in Central Asia, and became very wealthy as a result of it. And you can see here these beautiful, this is the Tausch Howley Palace, these beautiful blue tiles that you can see there. They were actually introduced by Persian invading armies, but the local Khan, he liked them very much, and so he decorated much of the city in it, and they became sort of iconic of Kiva. And those ceilings you see there, just up underneath there, there's a series of rooms like this, and they have these magnificent ceilings, which you can see here, which again, blend Islamic geometry with these Central Asian motifs, floral decorative motifs, which you see here. I've got a whole bunch of photographs like this called the Ceilings of Uzbekistan. If you're interested, I'll show you the link at the end of this. Really beautiful ceilings. Into Bukhara. I won't go too much into this other than say that Genghis Khan tried to destroy that minaret but failed because it was so well built. And into Samarkand, this is the Bibi Mosque, and in the center of the Timurid Empire. You'll see here this beautiful tile work that covers it. This is a form of Kufic calligraphy in which the words of Ali, God, and Muhammad are replicated across the surface. And to me, it looks incredibly modern, even though this is, it has been restored, but even these designs look incredibly modern, even though they're probably 400, 450 years old. I didn't take this photograph. It's a wonderful photograph, but I include it. It's by a photographer called Sebastian Schuster, and I include it because it captures some of the work that the Aga Khan music initiative or music program does, which is to support master musicians from Central Asia to promote their work across the world. They play at major venues like the Royal Albert Hall and others, but also to capture their knowledge and transmit it to future generations through schools and etc. It's an extraordinary program, and I encourage you to learn more about it if you're into music. Some more photographs from Uzbekistan here, from Samarkand, this lovely lady I met in one of the city's museums, and then moving east to the Fergana Valley, which is a center of pottery. This man on the left, Rustam Usmanov, he's a master potter there, and he's teaching his nephew in the center and one of his sons the trade there to continue on for the next generation. But they really, their work is displayed all over the world in major galleries. Here is a silk production factory, one of the first, or in a region where the first silk production factories existed outside of China, which was China's greatly super kept secret for centuries, but eventually how to make silk got out, and this was one of the first places where they started making it. And that factory, well, I'm sure it's gone through different changes, but is still very much active today. And you can see some of that, that's typical Central Asian pattern on the right there. Now we're moving into Kyrgyzstan. This, it doesn't quite have the cultural heritage of Uzbekistan, but it makes it up for these incredible landscapes and this nomadic culture that you find there. The Aga Khan Foundation is very active in the region and works, you can see here, particularly in economic inclusion, supporting this man on the left here. He's a flower, he produces flowers, roses, which he sells through greenhouses in places where flowers wouldn't normally sell. But he's one of many businesses. He's a fashion designer in the middle who's won a grant through us to expand his business and learn new business skills. And this lady on the right who's producing some slippers pizzas, which are sold in artisanal shops to tourists. And these are just a fraction of the people that are supported through these programs, but I just wanted to highlight some. The Aga Khan Health Services also has helped establish various clinics around the country through a network of early childhood development centers supporting kids to have the best possible start to life. And on the right here, some work around food security, particularly in the face of changing climate in this region. It affects mountainous communities way more than it affects us here in Britain at the moment. And so our work for the foundation is to help support farmers such as Karam Kol here. And as hopefully a heartwarming aside, this photograph, I had submitted this story to National Geographic Traveler, which they published. And of course, I was so pleased and proud about it, and I sent it to all my colleagues in Kyrgyzstan, and they did the most wonderful thing. They took the photograph, framed it, and then presented it to Karam Kol as a gift. And you can see he was pretty thrilled about the whole thing. So that was a really fantastic thing that they did. This is an extraordinary story. This is the University of Central Asia, a kind of state-of-the-art university campus in Narin, which is a very small town about 200 kilometers from the Chinese border. And in it is this sort of visionary thing taking place, which is the stage one of a university campus, which is its purpose is to help develop the future leaders of the region, so that, you know, rather than the brain drain of people going to different parts of the world, they can come right here and get a first-class education. And this is stage one. This is going to be a university town in the future. So, you know, watch this space. This is, you know, the vision for this is really, you know, an Oxford and Cambridge of Central Asia of the future. And this is one of 3 campuses that have been established in the region, one in Kyrgyzstan, one in Tajikistan, and one in Kazakhstan. And they have been established by His Highness the Aga Khan, along with the governments of those respective countries. So it's a really extraordinary thing to go and visit and to see this thing taking shape there, and the young people that are part of this, you know, these pioneering young people that are part of it. Not far away is this caravanserai called Tashrabat, which is very isolated. It almost looks like something out of Star Wars here. But interesting place to see. You can see those yurts in the distance, and this is really the life of the semi-nomad, which is a lot of the Kyrgyz rural communities are. So they travel with the seasons. They take their herds of yak and horses and camels and go and graze. This is the end of the grazing season. You can see there's not much grass left where we're staying in Songkul near this lake. Taken with a drone, some of these. But you can see that horse culture is still a huge part of the rural culture there. You know, young children often learn to ride before anything else. By the time they're 5, they're pretty advanced riders, taking part in national sports or whatever it might be. You can see some of that there. This lovely sunset shot in Songkul. And now we're crossing the border to Tajikistan. We're at about 4,000 meters above sea level. It's super dry and arid here. And you see these men wearing these traditional kalpak hats, which are Kyrgyz hats. And these are nomadic people who've come across the border. They put up their yurts in these areas. You can see them in the foreground to come and graze on this lush grass. But of course, in the winter, it will go to about -40. So they'll need to get out of there and get somewhere warmer in the nearby town. And, you know, AKDN and AKF do enormous amounts of work in this region, and I could talk for several hours about it, but I'm not going to do that. But I would like to zero in on a couple of things. One is, this is the Vanj Valley in Gorno-Badakhshan, which is the eastern half of Tajikistan to you and me. And this is one of many remote valleys that AKDN has helped improve access to electricity. After the fall of the Soviet Union, a lot of that infrastructure that was here fell into disrepair. A lot of people lost access to electricity. About 13% had access by the early 2000s, so very little. And the result of that is a lot of deforestation. Of course, people need fuel. And a result of that is often, you know, landslides and all sorts of associated problems around it. So since 2002, the Aga Khan Development Network through Pamir Energy has helped rehabilitate a lot of that infrastructure, has expanded it out, and now about 96% of the population, about 220,000 people who live there, now have access to electricity again. And, you know, this lady on the left I met a few years ago, and she had just moved back to this village called Day, which I had also visited a few years before that, when we were talking, you know, AKF were talking about improving access to electricity. And she had lived in Russia for many years, and she'd left because she didn't have access to electricity. You know, or without a washing machine, you're going to be spending 4 hours a day washing yourself or collecting firewood or whatever it might be. And I asked her, why did you come back? And she said, because we now have electricity, and I'd much rather be back in Tajikistan. They'd lived on the outskirts of Moscow, as many migrant workers from Tajikistan do. So she was an interesting story about migration there. I also wanted to focus in on tourism, because you may be interested as a group to travel to this area, and AKF, through an organization called PECTA, supports sustainable tourism in the region. This was the opening of a tourism center that I visited, and this young lady was dancing and took this photograph. Anyway, if you're interested in visiting the region, they'll help you, you know, with guides, traveling up mountains, whatever you like. They're called Pamir Eco-Cultural Tourism Association. This is a view of this old Zoroastrian fire temple overlooking the Pianj River with Afghanistan in the distance. And this is a bridge, one of several that have been built by Aga Khan Foundation to reconnect these regions. So on the right, you have Tajikistan. On the left, you have, of the river, you have Afghanistan. They're both were once part of one region. And during, I think in 1898, during the Pamir Convention, the British and the British and Russian empires separated these two regions into their respective spheres of influences, and their development trajectories went in very different directions. And so on the Afghan side, there's very little development but on the Tajik side, there is better access to healthcare as such, jobs, etc. So these bridges help not only connect these two regions, you know, cousins will live on opposite sides of the borders, sisters, brothers, whatever it might be, but they also allow Afghans to come and trade visa-free at some Tajik markets on either side of the bridge, and also to come and get critical healthcare if they need it, or else it's a 400-mile trip through those mountains that you see behind you, which you don't really want to be taking if you can help it. So I had wanted to cross Afghanistan, but that was not going to be possible for security reasons, which was a personal, you know, I was so sad about that. So you can see that line at the top where I hit the Afghan border, that's the Wakhan corridor. My next stop was going to be northern Pakistan. So you know, honestly, it was about between 20 and 40 kilometers across that Wakhan to northern Pakistan, but instead I couldn't cross it. I had to take a 7,000 kilometer detour to Dushanbe, fly to Dubai up to Islamabad, and then on. But before that, I just wanted to show you some pictures from Lahore, because there's a very interesting project there. This is this Mughal picture wall, which is being restored by the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, and it's, you know, art historians, conservators, engineers, architects, a whole manner of young people, especially young women, working on this project to restore this beautiful wall, which was built during the 16th century. You can see this is the first phase here, the above, before, and the below, after. You can see it's really, this is the first 50 meters, they've got another 400 to go, so it's a huge project. Then up to the north, we're in the Himalayan and Karakoram Mountains, the Hindu Kush. And this is Kaplu Palace, which was, you know, the seat of the local Raja of Kaplu. And when his kingdom was sort of dissolved, so too did his wealth, his power, his palace also fell into terrible disrepair. But in the early 2000s, it was restored by the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, and now is turned into a heritage hotel by Serena Group, which is also part of the AKDN. So you can go then stay there, and I can attest to it being one of the most wonderful places you can ever go and stay. Really romantic, lovely place. This is actually in another fort nearby, also restored by the Trust for Culture and run by Serena. You can see one of the bedrooms here, so hopefully that'll whet the appetite for when you can travel again. But you know, this building, you know, architecturally, it brings together many different features from the nearby areas, from Tibet, from Nepal, from Central Asia. It's really a fusion of it. But it wasn't just architectural ideas that were coming. You know, from Tibet, you had Buddhism, and until the 15th century, this was the dominant religion in northern Pakistan until the arrival of Islam. And you can see some of the kind of vestiges of that period here. It's called Manthal Buddha Rock, and you can see the Buddha in the middle with some Buddha vistas either side. Across due side, this is this wonderful alpine plain. These are kind of Kashmiri semi-nomads in the distance as we drove past. I visited this village, which in 2015 had been destroyed partly by a huge kind of rockfall and flooding from the mountains surrounding it. And unfortunately, these incidences are happening more and more due to climate change. And working with the Aga Khan Agency for Habitat, these men are literally smashing the rocks that came down the mountain and turning them into smaller rocks, and eventually building these walls to protect their property, their lives, their livelihoods from these flash floods that are coming down the mountains. So extraordinary work that's going into it, but the Agency for Habitat works with communities all across this region to help mitigate the effects of a changing climate and, of course, the natural disasters that they bring. Some more, I'll just flip through these. This is the view of the sort of legendary Hunza Valley. And you can see just in the top left, I think it's Rakapushi or Nanga Parbat, I forget which are these enormous peaks there that mountain climbers love to come to. Really dramatic landscapes. This is another fort restored by the Trust for Culture. The security guard there, Salahuddin, who's this sort of iconic character of the region. This is the Altit Fort, restored by the Trust for Culture. And as they were restoring it, they also, this is a remarkable project called Shikam, a social enterprise that brings together various marginalized women from the area to train them in carpentry, stonemasonry, and other things as well. And they've set up their own business, which sell all sorts of interesting products. Furniture to local businesses, but they learned through this restoration project and then established their business. It's an interesting model of development. And they actually, this building in the bottom right is called the Leif Larsen Music Center. And when I was there in 2015, in the top left, you can see there in the inside, they're literally building this building, which is now this music center. And you can see here, it nurtures local talent in all sorts of musical instruments and singing, and is supported by the Aga Khan Music Initiative. So it's really, amazing to see it go from nothing to building it to then actually people learning and practicing music in there. Now we're on the Korokaram Highway. We're heading north to the Chinese border. This huge highway, well, not huge highway, but it was a highway built in the 1970s and 80s that helped connect China to southern Pakistan or lower central Pakistan through the Himalayas and the Karakoram Mountains. And this is, incredible road. What it does for the region, at this altitude, working in these conditions, building this road really is a miracle. And for some people, it's called the 8th wonder of the world. So here, I'm going to miss the one on, well, I'll quickly show this one, which is the road going towards the Chinese border, but I won't show all of it. And then this one on the right is the Chinese border. This is called the Kunjarab Pass. It's the highest paved border crossing in the world. And in the middle of nowhere, you suddenly see this gateway with these PRC flags, and you cross over here, and suddenly you're in China. You're in Xinjiang province, and that's where we are. In case you're wondering on the map how we're crossing the border, crossover. These are still the Pamir Range that spill over into Western China. This is now into Kashgar, this kind of legendary Silk Road trading city. This was the Idkar Mosque, this city was interesting in that it was a kind of gateway for Chinese merchants heading for the West. And if you came into China, 500, 600, 700 years ago to trade with China, you'd have to pass through Kashgar. So it has this incredible mercantile exchange, and the legacy of it is a huge number of different ethnic groups live there, from Uyghurs to Kazakhs to Khalkhas to Hui, Han, all sorts, Kyrgyz, Tajik, and you'll see some of the faces of those people that I met in this. I spent 3 days in Kashgar. This is a man playing the dutar, which is a kind of the mother of Uyghur instruments, a kind of 2-stringed instrument here. Some of the other characters. This man is baking Tajik bread, which everywhere you go in Tajikistan you can find this. And this is the bazaar, and this man in the center. The man on the left is spinning some noodles, and the man in the middle is serving lagman, which is a kind of Central Asian speciality. It's delicious noodles with kind of fried beef and vegetables. And this man on the right is having his hair trimmed and his beard, and the barber is almost looking like he's having his own beard trimmed at the same time. And this is an amazing story. So I crossed the border on a minibus, and I sat next to the man on the left, old man, and I shared with him some fruit, some dried fruits, apricots, which you find a lot in northern Pakistan. And he didn't speak English, I didn't speak Urdu, so we didn't have much of a conversation, just nodding appreciation. And then we went our separate ways. And several days later, I saw him in a shop talking to this guy, and he in his suitcase, he had it open, and he had all these antiques in there, and he was selling them to this guy, and they didn't even speak each other's languages. They were doing all this quite serious hand gesturing stuff, which they obviously understood. And I suddenly realized, wow, like this guy's traveled across the border. He's selling to people across the border in Kashgar. I mean, this is like Silk Road trade from like 100, 200, 400 years ago. You know, to witness it still today, I felt like this is incredible. This is a miracle that this is still happening in this way. This kind of like small scale trade between places. And when he left the shop, I kind of tapped him on the shoulder because I thought maybe he'll recognize me. And he sort of stood there for a while. And then he looked at me, big smile appeared on his face, and he just jumped up and bear hugged me. And we kind of, you know, just smiled at each other for a while and then went in our different directions. But it was really a remarkable and very memorable moment. And then from Kashgar, I took an 18-hour train journey across the Taklamakan Desert into the Gobi Desert, where these massive dunes, which is these Bactrian camel you see here, which were once carrying all the goods along the Silk Road. They now carry tourists who want to do trips into the desert. And these cities around there are sort of sustained by these oases, and you can see a little water in the foreground there and this lovely building. And then the westernmost part of the Great Wall of China, a place called Jie Yuguan, which is, you know, was really to keep out the barbarian hordes that were maybe sacking those trade routes. And this is where the garrison, where the soldiers would be to prevent that from happening. See some more of it there. Then into Xi'an, which was one of the ancient capitals of China and considered to be the original sort of starting point of the Silk Road. You know, a lot of people were attracted to Xi'an over the centuries, including a lot of Muslims who would travel from Central Asia here. They settled there, and they created here the Muslim Quarter, which is this road and the sort of surrounding roads. And you used to have all these amazing restaurants and things like that, which you can see on the right-hand side. It's also home to the Great Mosque of Xi'an, which is the oldest mosque in China, dates back to 742 CE, which is pretty remarkable given Islam was only established, 100, 120 years before that. So they'd already built this enormous mosque within 150 years or so. So it kind of blends. You can see some of that Arabic on the left with kind of this sort of more imperial Chinese design. Some more pictures from Xi'an here, and then into Beijing, which is the end of the journey and the center of China's new Silk Road project. And really that had taken me, 40,000 kilometers. I traveled by train, bus, car, ferry, camel, horse, and eventually arrived in Beijing in November 2019. So I've probably spoken a little longer than I expected to, but I hope you enjoyed the journey. I hope you got a sense of some of the people, places, and cultures in between that I encountered, and a little bit about the work of the AKDN and the types of work we do. And look forward to any questions or feedback you have. And thank you very much for your time.
That's great, Christopher. Thanks so much for that whirlwind tour of the Silk Road and of your trip. I mean, we still have over 200 people with us. And what I would encourage is that if any of you have questions, you're able to submit them through the Q&A bar, and then we'll choose from them and try to bring you into the conversation. A couple of people have already asked questions, Christopher, during your talk, and so I wanted to just pick out a couple of them to start with. Because two of the questions are really around this sort of how you chose your route. One question was about whether or not you felt you were following the footsteps of Ibn Battuta or I suppose Marco Polo. Did you inspire your travels on any of those, sort of ancient journeys? And then the other side really is just what really were some of the criteria that drove where you decided to travel and how.
Okay, well, thanks for that question. I mean, In terms of the journey, this, I don't know, instinctively felt like the right route. I knew I wanted to travel. These are countries that I had read about and that seem to have a lot of them Silk Road connections. So of course, there are other countries. Often people say, why didn't you travel to here? Why didn't you travel to there? Or, but this seemed, I had 4 months. So that was a time frame. I didn't really spend more than 2 nights in a single place, maybe 3 if I was lucky. So I really had to keep the itinerary pretty tight. I wanted to travel through as many countries as I could. There is, of course, not one Silk Road. There are multiple Silk Roads. So, so those were some of the considerations. Of course, where AKDN worked, I wanted to make sure that I covered those countries, but they are all pretty Silk Road heartland kind of countries. So that wasn't an issue. But there were obviously many other places I could have gone to. And I hope that in a way, this is really, I often thought this is the journey of my life. This is the journey I always wanted to take. Matt may get a little a bead of sweat rolling down his head now, but I hope this isn't the only time I take this journey. I would like to do it other times because I want this to be a sort of living, breathing project. I'll share with you the URL for the Silk Road, well, the silkroad-livinghistory.org. You'll see their various stories, and I want to keep it going and keep adding to it. So hopefully a lot of the countries or places that weren't involved in this particular trip, I can add in the future. Yes, I would like to say I'm part of a lineage that goes back to Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta and Avliya Chalabi, and indeed they did inspire me, but they were traveling in much more difficult times than I was, and probably in less comfort. But they certainly, where they went, when Avliya Chalabi was talking about Mostar when I was reading his book, I was kind of thinking, right, got to go there. These are the type of travel writing where I thought, right, these are places that must be visited.
But I think the thing that's fascinating about that is that, yes, you have these iconic histories of the road, but what is amazing is you're still finding literal vestiges of the road, but also these lingering exchanges and cultural exchanges that show, I think, the pluralism, of course, of the region and how those exchanges have enriched it over time, but really their living legacy, right? And so I mean, for that reason, I love the title of the show, and also how they're a lifeline, frankly, for economic development in the region still. And you can just see, when you see the Karakoram Highway, you see that exchange of those 2 gentlemen trading. I mean, that's their livelihood, right? And we sometimes underestimate the importance that those kinds of connections, physical connections, can have on not only cultural connections, but really on lives and livelihoods. One thing I wanted to come, I've just lost it. Rubina Sutton has asked a question. She wants to know, what was the best bit of the trip and what was the worst?
Best bit, I mean, I've told you the story about, seeing that Silk Road trader. I mean, that was really wonderful. But I think, a place that really I was remarkable for me. I mean, I traveled to some of these places before, so I had some inclination of in some places what to expect. But and they were all remarkable. They take your breath away the first time and the second and third time. But I had never been to Kyrgyzstan before, and that really was just mind-blowing because, the very few places I've been to where there's that nomadic culture. So you would go to landscapes where there is, all you see are the yurts and the herds. There is no permanence. Everything is ephemeral. When it gets cold, those yurts are packed up and moved somewhere else. And that gentleness of life and the connection to the landscape and the temporariness of it, I found, I don't know, it touched me in some way, and it felt like it was a different way of life, a way of life we have lost contact with. So many places you go and the landscape is blighted by, terrible buildings, half-finished stuff, human, I don't know, our touch on the surface of the earth can be pretty ugly at times. And here it felt like this was a more gentle, sustainable way of life somehow. And so that really was an amazing moment. Worst moment was probably being left at the Kyrgyz border, the Tajik-Kyrgyz border. And my driver, or the guy who was driving me to the border, as we got closer to it, he started getting very animated and anxious, but we didn't speak each other's languages, so I couldn't really tell what it was about. But I later learned that he dropped me off at the border. I had my passport stamped. You're in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, and there's a military checkpoint, and I'd crossed several borders by this point. So I just thought, walk through, Tajikistan will be on the other side. And the military guy opens the checkpoint and dragging my luggage, all my camera equipment with me. And I just start walking down this road into the mountains, and I'm about 3,500 meters up. It's pretty cold. There's a glacier in the distance. My GPS is gone, but I can kind of see that there's this road that's going like this, which can only mean one thing. It's like either very steep upward or downward. And so I walked for a few kilometers, still no Tajik border in sight. And this dog tried to attack me and had to fend that off. Then met this guy in a little car with his cattle, and tried to pay him dollars to take me to find out even where the Tajik border was. Eventually, he wouldn't take me because he was looking after his cattle, but he let me sit in his car for a while until these German cyclists turned up in off-road bikes, and managed to persuade them to take me to the border, which was about 25 kilometers away, up over 4,000 meters, and it was minus whatever up there. So I was pretty annoyed with the driver who'd left me at this point. So yeah, otherwise I survived, so it was fine.
Well, that actually leads us into, there's several people, and I've got at least, so Ann Cooper, Eden Godard, and Nassim Mohammed, and probably some others, they want to understand, how did you do this? They want to, how did you get the visas? What were the administrative difficulties? And actually, can tourists still do some of this? So if they wanted to set out on their own, what advice would you give them?
Well, if you have a British passport, I can only speak from really that point of view and the hurdles that had to overcome or not with that. So everything up until Turkey is fine. You can go through, you can get a visa at the Turkish border. And then Iran obviously is complicated for a British citizen. You have to have have to be with a guide. And so I had a guy had to pick me up at the border, take me on a detailed itinerary that was all agreed beforehand. And that I had to do months in advance to arrange the visa for that. And that has to be vetted by the Ministry of Internal Affairs and all this kind of stuff. I had a drone with me at the border, so I definitely wasn't going to take that across in case somebody got the wrong idea. So I had to send that back by FedEx or whatever from the Turkish border. And so that was one. Turkmenistan is difficult because they apparently quite arbitrarily either give you or don't give you visas. And again, you need to be with a government sanctioned guide there. So you have to organize that a few months in advance. And then Uzbekistan, you can get a visa on arrival. Kyrgyzstan, I think the same. Tajikistan, I think it's probably better to do that in advance. Pakistan, I think as a tourist is relatively easy. I was on a work visa there, so that's a little bit more complicated, but was fine. Afghanistan, again, you'd want to get that in London if you could. And then China, which was interesting, was, I got the visa at the Chinese embassy in London, but they wanted an inbound flight and an outbound flight because they want to know how long you're going to be there. And I, of course, did not have a flight. The whole point was not to take flights. So I had my entire itinerary up until, from leaving London up to China, showing the guy in the visa office was like, what is this? Like, I just want an inbound flight and outbound flight. And so I had to buy my Eurostar to prove that I was leaving the country in the visa office, several months before leaving. And to be fair, I had to go back to the embassy or the visa office several times until eventually I got my Chinese visa. But yeah, you don't want to leave home without that. Hopefully that answers.
I mean, the other thing one thing to say, Christopher, in addition, is that, if you were a tourist, in addition to some of those administrative headaches, there is actually quite surprisingly a fairly robust tourist infrastructure. Well, robust is a relative word, I suppose you could say, but there is a small tourist infrastructure in places like northern Pakistan, southern Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, much of which our organization has worked with. Wild Frontiers, which is a travel company that helped organize part of Christopher's trip, has been working to help develop over time. And so it is actually possible as a tourist to visit these places. And I think the other thing is that somebody in one of their questions alluded to, is it safe? Is it dangerous, etc.? And I mean, Christopher, maybe one of the things you could talk a little bit about is that sense of hospitality that one encounters. I mean, on my travels there, I'm always struck by just how generous actually people are. Maybe not the border guards, but once you get beyond them, really, people are so welcoming and really quite so open and curious. And I don't, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your experience of that. I mean, as you were moving through.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to imagine, as I have, that when you're going places you don't know, that there are threats everywhere, and it's natural to feel that way because it's an environment that you're not familiar with. But I felt emboldened about traveling this, partly as I said earlier, that I had traveled to some of these places before and I'd only had positive experiences. And so I never once had felt threatened at all on this journey. I only felt positivity from people, apart from occasional border guard that Matt alludes to. And so maybe I was lucky, maybe I don't know what, but there's a part of me, the hospitality that Matt talks about in Central Asia or parts of the Islamic world where hospitality is part of the culture. You will be treated in ways that you feel ashamed that we don't treat for people who travel to the UK in the same way. You think, wow, what have I done to deserve this? And this is incredible. And so I only have positive things to say about that. And wherever I was, immediately food put in front of me, tea put in front of me, even if I didn't really want it. And that's another thing, that you have to eat it, or some of it at least. And but sometimes you have to stay around for a while, have a few cups of tea, or if it's somebody else, a few shots of vodka that they want to give. But it's all part of the experience. And I can only say I was received warmly wherever I went.
I think that's really important to emphasize. I mean, just like anywhere, you've got to be careful wherever you travel, frankly. But in that respect, especially if you're on some of these established tourist routes, it's absolutely possible to visit many of these countries, and something that I think we would certainly encourage and hope that this exhibition give people the curiosity and confidence to go out and do, frankly. Christopher, we've got lots and lots of questions. I've got at least 45 here, so I want to try to pick out a couple of them. There are a couple of people who have asked, they want to know, what are the things that, so this is a place where you visited before, right? You've been to the region before. So around which you would have had maybe some preconceptions from previous trips. And they want to know what surprised you? What did you learn that you didn't really know before, after even though you'd already visited the region? What did you learn through this journey? Well, or many things. I mean, it doesn't have to be one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit related to the previous question, and it was really an idea or a thought that had been seeded before, but had come to, say, germinate during this trip. And that's really that whilst we have all of our differences in the way our customs, our food, our language, ways of life, whatever it might be, we're all fundamentally want the same things, which is to be happy, to have a nice environment to live in, to ensure children have a happy upbringing and all the rest of it. And it's easy to think that people don't want some of those things, and they may want them in a different shape or form, but ultimately it doesn't look familiar to you in that way, but ultimately deep down this is what we all want. And so I think that idea really came to me, or I felt it more strongly than ever on that trip than anything else, is our similarities deep down, even though on the surface we may appear a little bit different. I hope that doesn't skirt it. If I think of another thing, I'll come back to that. I'm sure there are others, but
well, so Melissa Morton has asked, she highlights, she's picked up on the fact that you really focused on artisans and craftspeople. And I know that that is a theme that you find throughout all your work, you know, whether it was in Dar el Akhmar or whether it's here. And could you say a little bit for the audience about, maybe a little bit about why you're so interested in artisans, and also a little bit about, you know, what it was like meeting them and interacting with them on the trip? What drew you to them?
Well, I think, you know, there's a few things going on. One is that, you know, artisans make great photographic subjects, and because they're doing something, there's action, there's detail, there's all sorts. But I think on a more fundamental level, what has always drawn me to artisans and artisan culture is that, and I mentioned a little bit about it earlier, but was that, you know, through artisan culture, you really have it's like a you can time travel. You know, you can see how things were in the past, and you can learn from the way things are in the past, not just in the technique of how people are, you know, doing this lantern or making these tile works or whatever it might be, which may go back. That technique may be itself 500 years old or 1,000 years old. So you can learn about how things were done in the past and the skill that it took to make those things. But also in the design can tell you stories. So, for example, in Iran, those carpets I mentioned, you have these kind of silk carpets, which are for the wealthier people, and they have these kind of royal designs, which I suppose were probably established during the kind of Safavid period. These kind of really, you know, ornate, beautiful designs. And then you have the wool carpets, which are much thicker and rougher, and you put them on the floor, and they would all have different designs on them, which would tell you about different you know, tribal communities or ethnic communities living in parts of Iran. And actually, an artist who exhibited at the Aga Khan Center, Bita Gazelia, a while back, she part of her fascination is in the stories that those carpets tell about the different cultures. So hopefully that those are some of the reasons why I kind of artisanal culture I enjoy so much, and also that there's something inherently valuable in what they're doing. They're still making things with their hands. It's not mass produced. There is a human touch to everything. Everything is unique and individual, and rather tragically, you know, those skills are you know, being wiped out by globalization, by different changing tastes, by increase in raw materials, and with it, those skills, that knowledge, that view into the past is going too. So in some tiny way, whenever I photograph and publish photographs about artisans or tell stories, it's some sort of, you know, effort to rail against the machine and say, you know, these things are worthy of our time and attention, and there's inherent value in them, and you know, I don't imagine they'll do much, but hopefully they do, you know, something small.
I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why you're a match for the Aga Khan Development Network, frankly, Christopher, because, you know, if you think about our approach to development, you know, one of the things that His Highness has always emphasized is that culture is an asset for development, and that should be just the way that natural resources are an asset for development, and that pluralism and that sense of not only cultural tradition, but cultural learning and dynamism are things that countries can develop. They can cultivate actually as a way of creating livelihoods and value. And I, you know, for me anyway, whenever I see your pictures, it just brings that to life in so many ways. And is one of the things I just love about your work, frankly, wherever it's been. And I think for those of you who can, I would really encourage you to look at Christopher's website and get a sense not only maybe of his Silk Road photos and trips, but things he's done in, you know, I'm thinking of some things you've done in Zanzibar or again in Cairo that really bring that out. Christopher, a couple of, lots of people are interested in, well, somebody wants to know, what did you read before you left? And sort of how did you, you know, sort of get yourself immersed into it? And then that's Fiona Dunlap. And then Sam Pickens would like to know, do you remember, you know, what's the first thing that you remember that drew you to the region? The first thing you read or that you saw, you know, that kind of sparked that before you got on that plane from Beijing back to London all those years ago?
Yeah, thank you both. What did I read? I read, I mean, those interested will know Peter Frankopan's books on the subject, which are a great entry point. I have a book here by, just going to get it, it's here, called The Silk Roads, People, Cultures and Landscapes, edited by Susan Whitfield, which is a really fascinating book. I tried to read Marco Polo's Travels, but to be honest, it's not the most exciting travel book in the world. Much better is Leah Chalabi's Travels. He was the Ottoman traveler. I've got these wonderful books. I don't think I have them here, but they're all about Chinese Turkestan and other books from the region, and I have a few about Uzbekistan as well. I'm just trying to think of any. Oh, Colin Thubron. I mean, he wrote fantastic travel books about traveling in that region. There's so much to read. I've only really scratched the surface, but those were my kind of source material. I'm sure there are others too, but I'll have a think about that. And then first thing I read and saw that drew me to the region, Sam, thank you. God, now you're asking me to really stretch back in time. I don't know, but Uzbekistan is floating up to the top of my mind. It must have been some of those mosques, madrasas. I mean, this was later in life, but I remember my parents went there years ago, and before digital photos and all that, but just some of what they shared was amazing. But I think even before that, I'd seen some of that Kufic calligraphy, some of those turquoise domes, and just thought, wow, I've got, this is setting me off on an interesting trajectory of learning.
So someone has asked about the University of Central Asia, actually, and they have a question a little bit about what it is, some of the successes it's already having, where it is in its state of development. What could you say about that?
Where it is in its state of development? Well, in Narin, in Kyrgyzstan, and in Korog in Tajikistan, the first phase of the respective campuses is built, up and running, and I think has a student cohort there, and I visited both, and they're very active. And the one in Kazakhstan in Tikali, I don't think they've broken ground on it yet. Perhaps they do, Matt, you might know, but that's coming later. And then I've seen the plans for phase 2, 3, 4. I mean, it's going to be enormous, beautiful campus and training the next generation of kind of leaders from these regions. Also supporting the restoration or the protection of local cultural heritage. I know, Matt, maybe you could speak more about it, but there's an interesting project, isn't there, with the British Council about protecting local languages. But the students there are mostly being trained or being taught in courses that are very relevant, both locally but globally. So it's kind of local and international trade, local and international economics that are relevant to those mounted societies. So they have the skills that are relevant locally, but of course globally as well. And we really look forward to following those students and seeing those graduates where they go to in the future.
I mean, one thing I would say about that, just building on what Christopher has said, is that the university has been in operation since the mid 2000s, and while it was planning and building the campuses, it also wanted to begin actually things and make itself locally relevant already. And so one of its first programs called the School for Professional and Continuing Education really looked at how to provide a new set of skills, both vocational skills, but also professional skills, business skills, to a cadre of people. And now I believe at last count, and this was already a couple of years ago, they had already had 100,000 learners come through who had benefited from these programs. The other related to some of the cultural programs that Christopher was talking about is a cooperation with public school systems, state school systems and state university systems through the Aga Khan Humanities program that is partnering with some 100 public institutions around a humanities curriculum, in essence, that's adopted by these institutions to teach things like comparative philosophy, drawing specifically on philosophers and thinkers from that region, and put then sort of into dialogue with thinkers from the West, from the Middle East, from China, from other parts. It's a fascinating program, but meant to really develop critical thinking, creativity, those sorts of skills. And those are, I mean, without going on and on about it, I mean, those are a couple of the early successes. And then, of course, what Christopher was saying about the university itself now having its initial cohorts of undergraduates who are drawn uniquely from the region. I mean, all of the students are there. 80% of the faculty are from Central Asia. I mean, it's a real success story in that sense and I think will of course give a whole new character and capacity to a future generation of leaders in Central Asia. We have a very specific question, Sarah Lloyd, who says she has a geeky question for you, Christopher. She wants to know, what camera and lens did you use the most?
I could tell you very quickly, a Sony a7 III with a 24-70 GM lens, Sony also.
There you have it.
But I have more. I have many more lenses. But anyway, that was what I shot most of it on.
Well, actually, so there's somebody named Fenella Greenfield who wants to know what I would probably be most interested in when I travel. It's, I think, mostly about my stomach, which is what can I eat, where can I eat, when can I eat? And she wants to know, how did the food change or stay the same along your journey? And what did, and was there actually anything that you felt like that you encountered a bit like your artisans where, they were probably eating this back in the day along the Silk Road?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that I was thinking of including it, but I didn't in the end, which was about kind of tea and coffee drinking culture, because as Europe has become such a coffee drinking culture, and then when you reach Turkey, you kind of had both. You've got Turkish coffee, which is like a real serious drink, but you also have Turkish tea, which are in those beautiful little glasses, and they'll drink 20 cups a day, or 20 little, almost vials of them a day. But then as you start to move east, it's just tea, and there's like huge tea drinking culture, and people drink tea all day long, and different types of it, green tea, and there's different pots that are local to the place. But it's extraordinary how many people drink tea in, for example, Central Asia, which I hadn't really thought about before. And then in terms of food, Turkish food is pretty, it's got that, it's on the grill, it's the sort of kebab type food, it's on the barbecue, delicious, lots of veg as well. And then Iran, which is more kind of rich foods. Everywhere's big meat eater from Iran onwards, from Turkey onwards, to be honest. It's quite hard to find vegetarian, or if you're vegan, maybe really difficult. And then when you get into places like rural Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, it's that, I can't remember what it's called, somebody will probably know, but it's that, you've got your soup, and then there's like a chunk of meat in it, and you have it with a roundel of bread, and it's just a thin soup as well, and it's actually quite good, but it doesn't look very appetizing if you're used to food looking differently, as I was, from Europe. And then, so you feel like that meal has been eaten for centuries. And then I mentioned a little bit about the lagman, which are these hand-pulled noodles, which the guys pulling them like this, and you're making them bigger and bigger, and then they'll get, they're essentially spaghetti, and then they put on top this sauce of beef and fried vegetables and tomatoey sauce, and it's with some spicy canty kind of thing. It's delicious. But I didn't get sick. But a lot of the times I probably ate things I didn't really want to, but there wasn't that much choice in some places. But you get by. I hope that answered it.
So we have a person named Yasmin Katrada, and she wants to know, if you could travel back to one place and stay there for a while, where would you go and where would you stay?
Northern Pakistan. So I showed you some of those forts, and they are, really gorgeous places. A heritage hotel. You're in the Himalayan Karakoram Mountains, where these mountains meet, seeing these wonderful views. and you can hear the sound of the Indus River beneath you and the tributaries going in. And you can do some mountain climbing there, which I like. I'm not a mountain climber, sorry, more like a trekking, which I like to do. And you know, I've often said to my wife, you know, that's where we're going to go next. You know, it's just such a beautiful place, and you know, I could spend a long time there. Highly recommend it.
I do too. Beautiful, beautiful part of the world. Although it's hard to choose, southern Tajikistan is also absolutely stunning. So is, I mean, Kyrgyzstan, I haven't actually been on the plains the way that you have, but your photographs have made me want to go stay in a yurt. Did you stay in a yurt, by the way? Did you actually spend the night?
I did. It's pretty damn cold. I had, you know, in that Songkul area you saw, I had sleeping bag, about 3 duvets, all my clothes on, still freezing, and I didn't get much sleep. But about 5 o'clock in the morning, the yurt, they didn't tell me this, but somebody just came into the yurt with coals. So this fire suddenly appeared at the door, and there's a little stove, and he sort of just stuck some coals and wood or whatever it was in there, and the stove started sort of heating up, and you know, I managed to get about 20 minutes of sleep after that, but as this heat started to slowly come into the yurt. But yeah, maybe I was probably there a little later in the year, but it's pretty cold at night. But beautiful. I love, you know, yurts are, you know, it's like camping.
So we've got, I'm trying to look here. Lots of people want to know, did you, you know, do you speak any of the languages? Could you get by in English, or did you need to use a translator? How did you get by?
Yeah, yeah, really good question. Short answer is no, I don't speak really any languages. Well, yeah, I don't speak any languages, just those few kind of courteous words that you can use, like please, thank you, of some of the places. I was lucky in that, I suppose, you know, there obviously English gets you a fair way. When I went to Iran, I had to be that guide. So of course he spoke English. Turkmenistan, the same. Uzbekistan, they're pretty open to tourism and well organized there in that respect. And then when I got to Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Pakistan, I was lucky because I was traveling with colleagues. So I slightly cheated in that they were able to help me get around and translate and that kind of thing. And I knew some of them from previous visits, so it was kind of like being with friends. The one place where, wow, you really need a bit, and actually Sam, who asked the question earlier, I remember him saying it to me, he goes, you better know a little bit of Chinese, because no one speaks English in Western China. And I said, well, actually, you know, I was lucky because my first job was in Beijing, and I did some language courses when I was there. And even though that was a long time ago, somehow the language comes back, and you start finding yourself in desperate moments saying things like, where is the bus station? You thought, where did that come from? But fortunately it came from somewhere. So China is difficult, but you know what everybody uses now are these apps. So you just say what you want and then it translates for you. I mean, every hotel I went to, people were speaking into their phone and it was translating in the local language, and then they were doing the same back. So you can kind of do it that way, which is becoming more and more popular, and you can see where that's going soon. It will just be real time. You'll talk, they'll talk, and you'll be able to understand each other. But the apps really help.
Incredible, actually. So I actually have a time, I can't remember, do we only have 2 minutes left?
I think we're already a bit over, actually.
Oh, all right.
Happy to keep talking, but I appreciate
well, look, we'll ask maybe one last question then, right, because a couple of people want to know what's next, both in terms of what's next for the exhibition and the program, but also what's your next big project? What are you thinking about? Where do you want to go next and photograph? Have you got that far yet?
Oh, what a nice question. So yeah, in terms of the exhibition, it's up until the 16th of June, and we're hopeful that it will be extended until mid-September, but in a location just around the corner from Granary Square, which won't be quite as grand as Granary Square, but a nice location to have it there nonetheless. Then we hope it will travel to different cities around the world, and we're in discussion with some of our with various people about that. So that will be exciting to see. In terms of the broader program, we have a bunch of more talks coming up. So please do go to silkroad-livinghistory.org to learn more about those. We have some workshops coming up, so you'll be able to do courses in Islamic geometry and calligraphy and pigment design, pigments, paper, all sorts of amazing stuff, which we're doing in partnership with the Princess Foundation School of Traditional Arts. So that you'll find on the website as well. And there is a Silk Road Bazaar that we're also organizing in King's Cross in the Canopy Market area. That will be between the 11th and 13th of June. Again, more details on the website. So I encourage you to come to that. We've kind of convened some wonderful vendors, everybody from people selling Ottoman silks to Central Asian hats to chai and all sorts of wonderful stuff. So please come and see that. And then in terms of what photographic project next, I would love to do something about the Swahili coast and the relationship between the subcontinent and the Arabian Peninsula and Eastern Africa, and the kind of shared influences and relationships and connections between those regions over time and today as well. That's another region AKDM works in Eastern Africa. So there's a really interesting story there to tell as well. So that can be maybe the kind of spice route part of the Silk Road, in addition to it, but hopefully more on that soon. Thank you.
Well, look, stay tuned. Thank you everyone who stayed with us until now, 7 o'clock. Please go to Granary Square, check out the exhibition and the website as well, and the additional activities. Thank you very much for checking in. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all your questions. I'm counting over 100 questions here now. So the response has been great, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thanks very much. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.